They say news travels fast. Mine came wrapped in silence, in the middle of nowhere. 13 years of marriage, dissolved in a digital whisper. My name is Daniel, a 42-year-old staff sergeant with the 101st Airborne. I was stationed in Helmand for nearly 4 months when Rachel decided she'd had enough. The email subject said, "Let's be mature about this." Inside, just 3 blunt sentences. She'd already submitted the divorce papers. She'd already cleared out our shared savings. She'd already moved her new partner, Zach, into our home back in Boise. I read it twice, shut the laptop, took a shower in the shared stall, changed into uniform, and reported for duty like nothing happened. That night, I replied with a single word: received. No confrontation, no pleading, no emotion. My bunkmate, Thompson, glanced over. "You all right?" he asked, still flipping through his paperback. "Yeah," I said, "just stuff from home." He gave a slow nod, and that was that. Some storms you see coming long before the thunder. I didn't need a crystal ball, just paid attention. 6 months before I shipped out, the shifts began. Rachel stopped asking how my day was, started working late at the dental clinic where she handled appointments. 3 gym visits a week, but her body language stayed the same. Like she wasn't there to sweat. New wardrobe, new social circle, new phone lock I never had the code to. I never played detective, didn't check her phone, didn't trail her car. That's not my style, but I wasn't naive either. Quietly, I took steps. Not revenge, just preparation. I rented a small storage locker across town and tucked away what mattered. Our marriage license, my birth certificate, the deed to our house, which was in my name thanks to the VA military benefit files, my grandfather's old wristwatch, and my mother's vintage silver. I even set up a second account at a different credit union and funneled a portion of each paycheck into it. Not a large amount, just enough to stand if the floor gave out. The night before deployment, she met me at the airport, gave me a stiff hug and said, "Stay safe, all right?" Her eyes were dry, like she was sending off a co-worker, not a husband. To her, I was a co-worker catching a flight, not a husband heading into a war zone. Maybe deep down, I knew it right then. But I still clung to a thread of doubt, hoping I was wrong. I wasn't. What Rachel never realized was, I'd been ready for this moment. And what she didn't know was, I don't pick battles, but I never leave them unfinished. We first crossed paths at a friend's backyard cookout in 2010. I was back stateside between deployments, crashing with my buddy Eli in Boise. She was wrapping up nursing school, though she pivoted into admin work at a dental clinic. Less pressure, she told me. 8 months later, we tied the knot. She'd say she was proud of my service, but she never really got it. Her father worked in finance, her brother in pharmaceuticals. No one in uniform in that family. She'd often ask, "When will you get a real job?" She didn't see that after 15 years, the military wasn't just something I was doing. It was my profession. We bought our first home in 2014. Nothing lavish, 3 bedrooms, a patch of yard, in a quiet street. Mortgage was in my name, courtesy of the VA. Still, I added her to the deed, because that's what husbands do when they believe in forever. Marriage is about sharing, or at least, it's supposed to be. My dad passed away just a year after our wedding. Dropped dead from a heart attack while clearing snow from the driveway. My mom followed 3 years later. Lung cancer, despite never touching a cigarette. They didn't leave a fortune, but it was enough. Rachel and I cleared out our student debt and still had some financial breathing room. During our marriage, I deployed 4 times. Twice to Iraq, twice to Afghanistan. Every time I returned, something in her seemed further away, like she was slowly stepping out of the role she once agreed to play. One night, after I brought up extending my contract another 4 years, she said, "I didn't marry into this to be alone all the time. I'm not built for this life." I didn't argue. I understood. But the military had always been my anchor. It was the only place where I felt like I fit, where my presence mattered, where people counted on me and I delivered. By 2019, the cracks became harder to ignore. Small irritations turned into daily frictions. It started with little things. If I called during her girls' nights, she'd sound distracted, sometimes even annoyed. She began bringing up her friend Melissa, who'd divorced her husband and was now living her best life. Then came subtle jabs. We don't even like the same stuff anymore. We've just grown apart. I brought up counseling, thought maybe a third voice could help us find middle ground. She brushed it off. We're fine, she said, just in a rough patch. Then came the late nights at work. Weekend getaways with people I'd never met. New outfits, fresh hair, a gym membership she barely used. I could have called her out, demanded answers, but that's never been my way. My dad raised me to think first. Speak only when you're sure. So I stayed quiet, watched, prepared, because something inside me, that inner voice that's kept me alive in places most people wouldn't last a day, was whispering, something's coming. 2 weeks after that email, I was eating in the mess hall when my phone buzzed. Notification from the bank. Another withdrawal. $88,500. Almost everything we had left. I put down my fork. Opened the app. Joint account balance, $22.37. Our hard-earned savings, all $47,000, gone. Moved to an account I didn't recognize. The account wasn't familiar. Murphy, one of the guys from my unit, glanced over. Bad news? I locked my phone. Nah, just some account stuff. Later that night, I called the bank from the base phone center. It didn't take long to figure it out. Rachel had been moving money for weeks. Small transfers at first, then the bigger ones started right after I deployed. I hung up the phone and stood in the hallway for what felt like forever. Around me, guys were talking, laughing, calling their families. Normal life. Their worlds in one piece. Mine, falling apart. That's when Wilson found me. Heard from Alvarez that you looked like you saw a ghost at dinner, he said, his face full of concern. What's up? I didn't usually share personal stuff, but Wilson had pulled me out of a tight spot in Kandahar once. I trusted him. My wife emptied our accounts and moved her boyfriend into our house, I said flatly. Sent me divorce papers while I was out on patrol last week. He didn't give me the usual lines. No sympathy, no empty reassurances. He just asked, "What's your plan?" "I'm not sure yet," I replied. He nodded. "Let me know if you need anything." I couldn't sleep that night. I opened my laptop and logged into our home security system, something Rachel likely forgot I still had remote access to. On the screen, a truck I didn't recognize in the driveway. A man I'd never seen before walking Max, our dog, using my coffee mug, wearing my Boise State hoodie. And there was Rachel, laughing in the kitchen, the same kitchen I had remodeled myself during my last leave. Something inside me shifted. Not rage, something quieter, sharper, cold. I closed the laptop and grabbed my phone. Started a list. Call Marcus, my army buddy turned attorney. Review the VA loan terms. Reach out to Master Sergeant about emergency leave. Pull up the refinance papers Rachel casually mentioned last year. Double-check security on my pension accounts. I didn't feel heartbreak anymore. Not even betrayal. I felt locked in. This wasn't personal now. It was operational. At 0500 before reporting in, I shot an email to Marcus. Subject, need legal help, discreet and urgent. His reply came fast. Call me on a secure line. When I ended that call, while I was deployed, yeah, that's what she did. James leaned back, folding his arms. It's financial fraud, document forgery. Could even push it into wire fraud, depending on how she moved the money. I stared at the document. $330,000. That wasn't just betrayal. It was a coordinated ambush. One she had started planning the moment she thought I was out of reach. She think I wouldn't notice? I asked quietly. She was counting on you not having the bandwidth to fight, counting on you being too far away, too focused on survival to track paper trails. She miscalculated. I flipped the page. There it was, the fake signature, the loan officer's name, the deposit trail, all tied to her. You want to press charges? James asked. Or are you thinking civil route? I didn't answer right away. I just looked out the window at the wet Washington road. My instincts were back now, the ones the army sharpened. This was no longer a divorce. It was a mission. I want it all documented, I said. Everything, every form, every transfer, every signature. James nodded slowly. She won't see this coming. Good, I said. She shouldn't. She followed up 10 minutes later. You can't just show up and start causing problems. We agreed this would be civil. We never agreed on anything. She made choices. Now the consequences were arriving. I let the silence speak for me. The next morning, James filed the formal fraud complaint on my behalf. The forged documents, the bank statements, the co-applicant with a criminal record. It was enough to trigger an internal investigation. By afternoon, the bank had frozen the remaining funds linked to the refinance. That same evening, James filed a motion with the court, emergency injunction, property protection order, and a motion to void the refinance on grounds of fraud. We had the receipts, we had the motive, we had the timeline, and more than anything, we had patience. Because I wasn't after revenge. I was after accountability. James continued, his tone steady but grim. They're tying the stolen pads to a few filled prescriptions under fake names, controlled substances. It's serious, Nathan. I leaned back in the motel chair, staring at the ceiling. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. This was crime, layered and brazen. And if she's been helping him distribute... I didn't finish the sentence. James did. Then it's federal. I nodded slowly. Do they know she forged the refinance yet? Not officially, he said, but they will. When they do, this stops being about marriage. It becomes about intent to defraud a federal lender. There was a long silence. Your move now, he added. You want to press criminal charges or just reclaim your life? I picked up my phone, scrolled to Becky's last message, still unread. I didn't open it, didn't need to. She'd made her decisions. Now it was time for mine. Want to see how the final confrontation unfolds? Or would you like a quiet surgical end with legal victory and full closure? Toward me. 2 wire transfers, Thompson said, pointing to the screen. One to a PayPal account under the boyfriend's name. The other to a checking account recently opened under a business name, but linked to your wife's email. What kind of business? Supposedly a pet grooming service, he said, raising an eyebrow. Registered just a month ago. No business license, no activity. Likely just a shell. I clenched my jaw. Becky and her boyfriend were laundering the money. Sloppy, but dangerous. Thompson continued. We're filing a federal fraud report. You'll get a case number by the end of the week. After that, it moves to legal escalation, both criminal and civil. I nodded slowly. Can I stop the divorce process until this is resolved? James had already anticipated that. Temporary injunction's been filed. The court's freezing asset division until the fraud case is settled. I exhaled, for the first time in weeks, feeling like the ground beneath me was solid again. Thompson gave a tight smile. Not the homecoming you imagined, huh? Not even close, I said, standing. But now it's a war I know how to fight. Would you like the story to end here with legal triumph, or continue through Becky's unraveling as the consequences catch up? She wasn't just moving on, I said slowly. She was executing something. They had this set up in advance. Looks like it, James replied. The refinancing, the money movements, listing prep, she probably timed it all to your deployment. So I couldn't interfere. Exactly. I stared out at the street. People walking dogs, sipping coffee, laughing. The kind of simple peace I used to imagine for us. I wasn't just betrayed. I was targeted. She tried to sell the house out from under me, using forged documents, stole our money, and planned to disappear into some life she'd already built with this guy, I muttered. And if I hadn't caught it, they'd be gone, James finished. Probably across state lines, maybe out of the country. And you'd come home to nothing. My hands curled into fists, but my mind stayed sharp. This was no longer about heartbreak. It was about justice, about reclaiming what was mine. Okay, I said. What's our next move? James's voice was calm, steady. Now we play offense. Want me to continue with how Nathan turns the tables legally and personally, or pivot to Becky's perspective as things begin to collapse around her? I stared at the message, reading it twice, then once more. She didn't understand what was happening. Number. She didn't understand that I wasn't the same man who left for deployment months ago. The man she blindsided. The man she thought was helpless, halfway across the world. That man was gone. This version of me, he had a plan, and allies, and every receipt. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the message to James along with a single line. Let's move forward with everything. The next morning, the FBI called. A special agent named Heller wanted to meet in person. Soon. The case had teeth now. Forged government documents, misuse of VA loan funds, identity theft, potential racketeering. Not just a domestic betrayal, a federal crime ring targeting soldiers. By noon, I was sitting across from Agent Heller, who laid out folders like a war map. We've seen a version of this before, she said, her expression tight, but never this well connected. Jeremy Ryan has been on our radar. He uses women in vulnerable positions, flips property for under-the-table commissions, and disappears before it blows back. And Becky? I asked. She's not clean. At best, she's an accessory. At worst, a partner. I exhaled slowly. What happens next? We go after all of them. Fraud. Which means federal charges, Agent Donovan added, and serious time, especially if your wife was knowingly involved. I nodded, the weight of it all settling in, not the burden, but the clarity. This wasn't just revenge. This was justice, and not just for me, for every service member who came home to a broken life and a cold trail. Agent Patel leaned forward. We'll be issuing subpoenas this week. We've already frozen assets tied to Spencer and Ryan. We'll move carefully, but deliberately. In the meantime, lay low. Don't contact Becky. Don't engage. I left the office with a quiet resolve. Not rage, not even grief. Just focus. Becky had sent another message while I was inside. Please, Nathan, just tell me what's going on. I'm scared. I didn't reply. Not yet. She should be. I took the card, slipped it into my wallet, and nodded. I won't, I said, though every part of me wanted answers. Direct ones, in her voice, not through lies or bank statements. As I stepped outside, the Spokane sky was grey, threatening rain. I thought about the 6 months Becky had lived a double life. The man walking my dog, the sweatshirt, the laugh in my kitchen. It all made sense now. Too much sense. That where house poor comment hadn't been worry, it had been foreshadowing. She'd been laying the groundwork, normalizing the idea of selling, so when things moved quickly, I wouldn't question it. But I had questioned it. Just too late. I drove back to the motel and stared at the blank ceiling, thoughts racing. Becky's role, was it blind trust manipulated by Ryan, or was she part of it from the start? The agents would figure it out, and if she was guilty, she wouldn't just lose the house or the money. She'd lose everything. That night, Becky called. Not a message, not a text, a real call. The screen lit up with her name. I let it ring once, twice. Then I answered. James raised an eyebrow. Well, there's your answer. I gritted my teeth. She sent me to the park as a distraction, so they could meet the agent without me around. Textbook misdirection, James said. Classic tactic when trying to keep a co-owner from blocking a sale. She wanted to make sure you were nowhere near this house today. We sat in silence, watching the house like a stakeout. 30 minutes passed. Then Spencer came out with a camera and started taking pictures. Front yard, porch, angles of the driveway, listing photos. I took out my phone and snapped a few of my own. Evidence. "This is real," I said. "They're trying to sell it behind my back. Again." James nodded grimly. "But this time, you're watching it unfold. And this time, you're not powerless." I leaned back in the seat, anger giving way to something colder. Purpose. Becky was trying to sell the home I'd built my life around, with forged signatures, hidden meetings, and misdirection. But now, I had everything I needed. "Let's make some calls," I said. Patel's name flashed on the screen. I answered quickly. "This is it?" "It's over," she said, her voice calm but with a hint of satisfaction. "Spencer and Jeremy are both in custody. The evidence you provided, combined with the recordings and security footage, sealed the case. We'll have a formal statement soon, but it's done." I felt a strange mix of relief and something darker. The house, the money, the betrayal, it was all finally catching up to them. But I couldn't shake the image of Becky, how she had stood by while all this was happening. "What about Becky?" I asked. "We're still working on her involvement," Patel replied. "She's been under surveillance. At this point, we're gathering more evidence before we bring her in. But we'll keep you in the loop." I nodded. "What now?" "We'll be in touch with next steps," she said, and then hung up. James had been silent for a while, watching the scene unfold. I turned to him. "I didn't expect it to play out like this." "Things rarely do," he said, giving a small shrug. "But now you can move forward. You've got a clean break, and the law's on your side." I watched as FBI agents led Spencer and Jeremy into a van. Both men were silent, handcuffed, their fate sealed. My phone buzzed again, a message from Becky. "Where are you? What's happening?" I stared at the screen, hesitating. Then I typed a quick response. "You'll hear from my lawyer soon." I put my phone down and turned to James. "Time to start over." James nodded, a knowing look in his eyes. "Exactly." As the FBI finished their work, I realized that the fight wasn't just about the house, the money, or even Becky's betrayal. It was about taking back control of my life, about not letting them dictate my future anymore, to sign the refinance paperwork under the assumption that it was necessary for us to stay afloat financially. The agents didn't buy it, but without direct evidence linking her to the broader conspiracy, they couldn't charge her with anything more than forgery and theft under false pretenses. Becky's story fell apart quickly once they reviewed the evidence. They found texts, emails, and even phone records showing that she had been aware of Jeremy's involvement in other fraudulent activities long before things escalated with our house. Still, she clung to the idea that she'd been manipulated, pressured, and tricked by Jeremy, trying to portray herself as a victim of his manipulation. As the case unfolded, I was asked multiple times to provide a statement. I spoke to the FBI a few more times, giving them everything I knew, everything I'd gathered. They needed my help to fully nail down the scope of the operation. I did it not because I wanted revenge, but because this had gone far beyond personal betrayal. I wanted accountability. Becky's lawyer made an attempt to strike a deal, offering a plea bargain in exchange for her cooperation. But I couldn't let her off that easy. She'd chosen to play her part in this betrayal, and she'd made the decision to risk everything, not just her freedom, but her family's future, for a man who had no loyalty, no moral compass. Finally, the day came. Becky was arrested, charged with conspiracy, forgery, and theft. The plea deal offered wasn't as lenient as she had hoped. She'd spend a significant amount of time in prison, long enough to reflect on the choices she'd made. I sat in my lawyer's office when I got the call. My heart didn't race. There were no tears, no outbursts of emotion. It was the conclusion I'd expected, and part of me had been waiting for it all to fall apart. But there was something oddly freeing about it too. The weight of the lies, the deceit, and the uncertainty I'd lived with for so long was finally lifted. And with it came the realization that I had a future again, one that was no longer tethered to the wreckage of my past. As I looked at the papers before me, the divorce settlement, the financials, and the arrangements for custody of the house, I felt like I could breathe again. My life, my choices, were finally in my hands. James called later that day. "How do you feel?" he asked. I took a deep breath. "I think I'm ready to start over." "Good," James replied. "You've earned that." And for the first time in a long while, I truly believed him. And what they'd been through, just like me. Betrayed by someone they trusted, manipulated by the same con men who had nearly ruined my life. I wondered how many of them had gone through the same stages of disbelief, anger, and helplessness. I thought about the long-lasting scars this type of betrayal left behind, and how many of those families had struggled to get the justice they deserved. But then, something shifted in me. I realized that while the process had been painful, it had also been liberating. I wasn't the same person I was when I first found out about Becky's betrayal. I'd been forced to confront some of my darkest fears, and in doing so, I had reclaimed control over my life. The anger and resentment had gradually turned into something else. Acceptance. There was peace in knowing that this chapter was finally closed, even if it hadn't ended the way I'd imagined. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my lawyer confirming that the final settlement check had been cleared. The full restitution had been returned, every cent. The house was mine again. I felt a small weight lift off my shoulders, but the truth was, the financial restitution didn't matter nearly as much as the emotional release that came with knowing the truth had come to light. I looked at my phone, contemplating whether to reach out to the other families that had been affected, to let them know they weren't alone. It was something I had thought about doing for months, and now, with everything behind me, it felt like the right thing to do. I had no idea what they had gone through, but maybe, just maybe, my experience could bring them some kind of closure or reassurance that they could fight back. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I felt a strange sense of hope. Life was still a mess, but it was my mess to clean up now. There would be no more living in the shadows, no more fearing what might come next. And that, in itself, was worth more than any settlement or legal victory. The past had been difficult, but the future felt wide open, like a new chapter waiting to be written. And this time, I was in control. Other men who deployed, thinking their homes and marriages were safe, only to return to emptiness. I hadn't planned on being the one to bring down Jeremy and Spencer's operation. I just wanted what was mine. But sometimes life has a way of working out in ways you don't expect. My phone buzzed. A text from Becky. "I never meant for things to end this way." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. A year later, I sold the house. I couldn't stand living in it anymore. Too many memories, too much betrayal in those walls. I used the money to buy a small cabin outside of Missoula, Montana. 2 bedrooms, 10 acres of land, a creek running behind it, no neighbors for miles. I took early retirement from the Army. 20 years was enough. I'd given enough. I got a dog, a German Shepherd named Scout. I started doing carpentry work for locals. Nothing fancy, but it kept my hands busy and paid the bills. My military pension covered the rest. Sometimes I thought about Becky, wondered where she'd ended up. James heard she'd moved back to her hometown in Oregon, working at another dental office, starting over, I guess. I didn't hate her anymore. I didn't feel much of anything about her, to be honest. She'd made her choices, and so had I. One evening, I got a letter from a woman in Fort Worth. Her husband was in the Navy, deployed when Jeremy and Spencer tried to run their scheme on her. The FBI had given her my name as part of the case. "You don't know me," she wrote, "but you saved our home. Thank you for fighting back when it would have been easier to just walk away." I read it twice, then pinned it to my refrigerator. Some days, when the silence got too loud or the memories too sharp, I'd look at that letter and remember that something good had come from all of it. Last I heard, Jeremy was still in prison. Spencer too. The system worked for once. As for me, I was finding my way forward, one quiet day at a time, building something new, something that couldn't be stolen, forged, or betrayed. Something that was just mine.